Hello and welcome back to the Coming of Cage podcast. I am Derek, one of your two hosts. I've got your other host right here, Ryan.
Oh, hi. I was
Hey,
just finding my way into the podcast. I was down the way.
down
Had
the
to run
way.
run into our office,
Yeah, it's a long commute. It's a
our
long commute.
podcast offices.
That's right.
Yeah.
Uh, but we are the Coming of Cage podcast, your Nicolas Cage movie review podcast. This is episode 36 of the show. We are covering the 2016 film Snowden, which really stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt, as well as Shailene Woodley and Zachary Quinto. And of course, Nicolas Cage is in there for a little bit anyway.
But for like 6 minutes, yeah.
We'll get to that. We'll get to Mr. Cage. This movie is directed by Oliver Stone, who brought you the likes of Platoon and Natural Born Killers and Born on the 4th of July and JFK. So you can kind of sense a trend in the types of movies he likes to provide. Ryan, do you want to tell people how we do this?
Yeah, so we watch a movie.
Good start.
And then we start recording on a computer, and then we talk about the movie. It's pretty fun, good times.
The level of detail, man, is just great.
What can I say? I'm detail-oriented.
For those who jumped in right here, this is their first episode. They were like, Snowden, I have to know what people think of Snowden, the movie.
Specifically, these two weird guys. I need to know. Yeah. No, I take notes throughout the movie, usually like for funny or weird or, non-basic reasons. I like to only notate things that are funny or important to talk about afterwards. But this movie didn't offer as many of those things. So most of my notes for this one are just like things that happen, not necessarily things that need to be discussed in the podcast afterward. So apologies in advance. This was definitely not a movie that was my particular flavor of movie.
It's not your cup of tea.
Correct. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen another Oliver Stone movie, so it's it's fine.
That's fair. I mean, I've seen Born on the 4th of July. I've seen Platoon. So I've seen some of his stuff. But this movie in particular is about Edward Snowden. Well, it's actually based on a book about Edward Snowden. The movie, according to IMDb, is the NSA's illegal surveillance techniques are leaked to the public by one of the agency's employees, Edward Snowden, in the form of thousands of classified documents distributed to the press.
Right. And this was something that happened in real life.
Yes.
Like in the last 10 years.
2013, 2012, 2013.
So yeah, in the last, depending on when you're listening to this, 10 years. Yeah, so it's a pretty modern thing. Kind of weird that like a movie came out 3 years after it happened, but
that seems to be the new trend, though, right? Like a big thing happens, somebody makes a movie about it. It's just the way it goes now. Sometimes those movies are good, sometimes they're not.
Sometimes they're mediocre,
That's right. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays Snowden, Edward Snowden, in the film, so he's the title character. And Nicolas Cage plays Hank Forrester, who is one of his teachers / advisors when he is training at the CIA. So that is Nicolas Cage's character there. Ryan, why don't you kick us off? What's your first note?
My first note is dramatization, because right at the very first thing they say in this movie is that it's a dramatization of events that happened. And so that, for somebody like me that didn't really follow the Snowden thing happening in real life makes me go, okay, so what in this movie is real and what isn't? Because, it's kind of when it's based on real things that happened in our lifetimes, something you want to take a side on.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a thing you're watching a movie that's like made for dramatic effect and they've added stuff to it, it's really hard to take a side without going, well, I probably have very little of the story, the real story,
Yes, I agree with you. I do want to give him a little bit of credit for saying that at the beginning of the movie, because there's so many movies that are like based on a true story, inspired by real events, right? And then the movie just goes and we're left to just believe that this is how it happened. So I do appreciate that they at least tried to call out that this is not a one-to-one recreation.
Sure.
for what it's worth. I appreciated that.
Yeah. So then the movie opens with a secret mall meetup with like a couple of kind of assumed to be reporters or news people sitting there talking about what they're doing and watching all these people at the mall thinking this person could be the person that contacted them. And eventually a person walks up flipping a Rubik's Cube in his hand, which is a big point in the movie. And they were told to watch for somebody with a Rubik's Cube in their hands. So then he leads them to some hotel somewhere. And the movie kind of, once they get to that point, it kind of flips between like a modern what's happening in this hotel room, and then as he's recounting events, flashbacks throughout the years of time that the important things in his life happened.
Right. So that time period is quote present day, which is 2013 with the news reporters, but it flashes all the way back to as early as I believe it was 2003 is when we first
joined the military.
Yeah. So it's a 10-year, we're following him over the course of a decade. So there's a lot of ground to cover for sure.
Yeah. And then my next note is weird Joseph Gordon-Levitt voice.
Yeah. He puts on a different kind of inflection and tone in his voice throughout the entire film.
Yeah, it's fine. I think it was weird for like the first 10 or 15 minutes of the movie, and then after that I was just fine with it. But it did, if you've watched him in a lot of stuff, it did definitely stand out early on.
Yeah, but like once you hear what Snowden actually sounds like in real life, he did a pretty good job. All things aside, like that in particular, I thought he did well.
Yeah, that's fair. My next note is voiceover. Sadly, it wasn't a Nick Cage voiceover because that would have been a square on our bingo card, but our Cage-O card. But we get a Joseph Gordon-Levitt Snowden voiceover of like his early military time. And we find out that he's a small guy, like, light and thin and short, so he is carrying this 50-pound rucksack all the time and doing all these workouts with his platoon and everything. And he gets up one morning, you've seen military movies where they do like this vicious wake-up call at like 4 a.m. and everybody shoots up out of bed. Well, he shoots up out of bed and breaks both his legs. Well, according to the doctor that he sees, they were already broken, like hairline fractures or something like that, and that he just finished him off when he jumped.
And like, up until this point, we're watching him like doing some of the basic training stuff, right? And he's not failing, but he's also not like excelling either, right? And then man, that fall, I felt that. Oh man, I will say that. Yeah, that made me kind of cringe a bit. That when he falls and breaks his legs, that got me.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it, but it was a weird scene, and he's like trying to hide the pain so that he doesn't, and then everybody leaves without him. And then they realize he's gone, and so they start screaming for him and yelling for him, drill sergeant voicing him. And so then he's medically discharged from the military. And he goes for a job interview with the CIA. And he gets the job. It's like, it shows several interview process where he's talking about where he doesn't have a high school diploma. But he talks about all his qualifications, and he convinces them that he's the right person for this position. And he gets hired.
Yeah, like he's not your typical applicant. Right. And that's a main thread through the early parts of this timeline, the 2003 to 2007 timeline, is very much about how he's not typical, right? He doesn't fit the mold of the CIA, agent and things of that nature, right? But he kind of gets taken under the wing of this guy, Corbin O'Brien, because now we're fighting in cyberspace, right? That's kind of like the big shift here, right? Is that the attacks that we're talking about in this film are coming from the web. They're internet hacks, right? These are people who are hacking into defense systems, banking systems, all that kind of stuff, right? Individuals, other militaries. And so now we need those types of people, who can hack back essentially.
Right. Yeah. Reverse cyber attackers, white hat hackers, or whatever you want to call them.
Right. Yes.
So on his way to his first class, it kind of shows. It kind of shows like how intense the security is. Like he drives up in his car and they make him put his hands through the steering wheel, and the dog sniffs around, and they let the dog jumps in the trunk, and
that seemed like a lot. That seemed like a little bit of overkill, given that he was invited.
Well, they probably, I would assume, do that for everybody. But,
yeah, but like it's just a training facility. It's not the actual CIA either.
I'm sure they have access to stuff that's important, but who knows?
It seemed like a lot. Hey, I do have a question though. Did that place seem familiar to you?
No.
Okay. It looked a lot like I believe it was Dying of the Light, where he was like giving like a speech to new recruits or whatever in the CIA, and I could have sworn it was the same location.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe.
So
could be.
Okay.
So yeah, on his way to his first class or first, bit of training, whatever, he runs into Nick Cage's character, who was a government employee, so that was a checkbox on the bingo card.
Bing.
But yeah, he's the guy that specializes in like what, I don't know what
cryptology.
You would call it. Cryptology. Yeah, I was gonna say cryptology, but then I was like crypto sounds like cryptocurrency. But yeah, like different. If you don't know what cryptology is, it's like when you're encrypting, messages and things like that, different ways of sending secret messages that are, you have ways of deciphering them, things like that. Yeah.
Or breaking other people's codes and figuring out what they're saying. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what he specializes in. And that's his job. And he's wearing a sweater vest. That was my next note. Sweater vest. We don't see a lot of sweater vests Nick Cage's in these movies. So
we don't.
That was a real pleasant experience.
Well, this was student advisor Nicolas Cage is really what we got to see.
Sweater vest really sells the student advisor. Yeah, so that's perfect.
Yeah.
So yeah, this Edward Snowden character goes in there and starts having a conversation with him. He can like identify a bunch of the different things that he has in his office, different devices for breaking codes or deciphering codes.
It's basically a museum for that technology, for lack of it. Like it's just an archive of every cryptological piece of machinery that's ever existed. It's got, like the world's first supercomputers sitting in the back of the room for some reason over there. And, not in the Smithsonian where it would probably be, I would think. But
I would rather he went to a place that was cryptozoological rather than cryptological, so that we could have seen the chupacabra.
Yeah.
The Mothman. Anyway. So then we get a scene of like super dramatic programming where like they're like, okay, we need you to build a database, then destroy it, then recover it. And if it takes you more than 8 hours, you're out of the class. And of course, the smartest man in the world, Edward Snowden, gets it done in 30 minutes.
38
minutes, yeah, which he specifies because the instructor says 41 minutes, and he's like, no, 38. And yeah.
It is hard making a hacker movie, right? Yeah. Because it's just not that exciting watching a dude clicking a keyboard.
Right, and it's just like a lot of zoomed in shots of keyboards and like just really dramatic shots.
Well, because like you can't even show like the whole screen, right? Because they're not going to put real like hacking code up there for the CIA or anything like that, right? So it's got to be just kind of nonsense BS terminal command stuff, right? And so they can't even show it all. They're doing swooping shots around people with this like intense
people are like wiping sweat off their foreheads because there's it's ridiculous. And this is where the movie started for me to cross into more of like a masturbatory like thing for Snowden. Like, I didn't know for sure that he was involved in the movie. Later on, it's kind of confirmed that the actual person was. But if a lot of this stuff, that with the whole dramatization thing at the very beginning made it feel like it was like for a lot of self-flagellation. You know what I mean? Like, I got this done in 38 minutes. I'm the smartest man in the world. Like, and then there's one point in the movie where he walks into a room and he's like, this is the smartest man in the CIA right here on your doorstep. And it's just a lot of that. I did not like that at all. There will be several moments where I reference that.
So Oliver Stone met with Snowden before he wrote the movie and made the movie, as well as after, and even showed Snowden a rough cut of the film. And kind of skipping to the end, Snowden himself, there's documentary footage of him at the end of this movie. So this certainly was not made in a vacuum. Snowden had some input. What that level of input was, I don't know, but it's a
Well, I can't
fair
imagine he was upset with
right.
being called the smartest person in the entire universe like 4 times in the movie.
I mean, look, whether or not anyone agrees or disagrees with what Snowden did, this movie does portray him in a very positive light.
Yeah.
Regardless of our own feelings about what he did, it doesn't really matter. The movie portrays him he's the hero of this film. He's the protagonist. He is the hero. He's got a journey that he goes on.
Yes.
That's very, maybe linear is not fair, but a very clear journey.
Sure. And we can't really talk about this movie without getting into some political stuff.
Yeah.
So be prepared for that. I'm sure we'll get into it here shortly. But yeah, my next note is photo shoot date. So it's been a couple times at this point where he is talking to some woman on a dating site, and she says something about him being pale. Are you this pale in real life, or something like that? That's referenced several times in the movie. But he meets up with her for a date, and apparently, oh my god, if I showed up to a date and this is what the way the woman acted, I would be out so fast. She just wanted to take pictures of him constantly.
Their whole relationship is, especially early on, is very strange to me, because like that's supposed to be the first time they met.
Yeah.
But they're not acting like it's the first time they've met.
And she's got like this DSLR, like, well, maybe not DSLR, but she's got some sort of like actual like photography camera that she brought.
She's
to
a
the
photographer.
Yeah, it's clearly like somebody that takes this very seriously. And she keeps telling him to like do these poses and like ask what he thinks about things so that he'll move his face in a certain way and she can get pictures. And it's just constantly taking pictures. And he references several times he doesn't want his picture taken, really, like, or like he's not comfortable in front of camera. Super comfortable. At this point, he's more comfortable than he is later in the movie.
Yeah, at this point, you just feel like he's bashful.
Right.
He's kind of shy, whereas later there's a very good specific reason he has that aversion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Next on that same date subject, they get into the political talk. They're in Washington, D.C. I think Washington,
yes,
D.C., if I remember right. Yeah, because they're in front of like the White House and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they start talking about. There's some like protesters that come up with like a thing to sign,
a petition.
A petition. Yeah, that's the word. And yeah, like she's willing to sign it immediately, and he's like, no. And he starts talking about like the liberals and stuff like that. So at this point, it seems like he's very clearly Republican supporting person.
Yeah, so they paint these two. So Lindsay Mills is the girlfriend, and she's played by Shailene Woodley. And yeah, they're both painted at this point as the very kind of cliche red and blue person.
Yes.
Right. He is the conservative patriot. She is the bleeding heart liberal. They have the talking points that are both very cliche that you could grab from really any major news outlet, especially at that particular time period. Because this is, I think they've jumped at this point. I think it's like 2005 or 2006-ish, I think, at this particular point. So it's a couple of years later. George W. Bush is in office at this point. I think he's in his second term at that time that this is happening.
Yeah. But aside from the Republican Democrat talk, but you should never talk about politics on the first date. In my experience, politics are one of those things that will, destroy a relationship before there is any relationship, and maybe for good, maybe for better, maybe for worse. Yeah,
I think it depends on the person. Right.
Yeah, I mean, some people are so into politics that one different belief and they're done and they're not interested anymore. And some people are a little more open-minded than that. Still, not recommended. Take it from me. If you're going on a first date with somebody, not that I have experience with that particular thing, but it's something I was always told. Don't talk about politics on the first date. Don't talk about politics or religion. There's like a bunch of rules for it, but do whatever you want. I don't care. I'm just saying it's probably best practice to like have a date where you're talking about things other than politics and then bring that up on the second or third date. But
So you heard it here. Everyone reach out to Ryan, let him know your favorite first date topics,
there you
and
go.
he will
Boom.
grade those
Yes.
topics.
Yeah, that's
So.
right. Send them to Coming of Cage on Facebook. I see everything that comes through there. So, um, and then my next note is Nick Cage wears glasses, an old photo, which is
Oh, right.
our Cajo bingo. They show an old photo of him like when he was in Snowden's position, like just coming into the training, and he has glasses on, and
He looked so. It reminded me of how he looked in Racing with the Moon.
yeah, it was definitely like a younger Cage.
Yeah.
He also smokes, which we've talked about adding to the bingo card, but we have not yet.
Yeah.
It'll be an alternate. One of these times we'll add it in there, but yeah, he definitely smokes pretty heavily in this movie. And him and Snowden in the movie are mostly just like Nick doesn't have a really important role in this. It's more just to kind of start to open Snowden's eyes that the things that he believes that are happening in the government are not happening the way he thinks they are, and to start to getting him to disillusioned with the government a little bit. Just cracks in that shell a little bit.
I feel like some scenes were cut specifically for Nick because he's really only in, I think, 3, maybe 4 scenes. And the very last one he's in is where it's placed, what he says, its purpose in the film, to me felt like there were pieces missing that led up to it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. But just basing what we got off of it, yeah, I think that was really the only kind of role that he played, was to kind of introduce that things might not be as they seem in the government. Which is kind of a theme throughout the whole movie. He's slowly learning all the terrible things that the government does, and then eventually releasing that information. But yeah, then we get to meet Timothy Oliphant in Switzerland, which he's great.
He's great.
Yeah. I mean, not necessarily like a great person in this movie, but I love Timothy Oliphant, so Oliphant, however you say his name, I'm not sure.
I thought it was like font, elephant.
Could be, but he's great regardless of how you pronounce his last name. I love him in almost everything he does, so I'm a big fan. It was nice to see him.
It was, yeah.
What's funny is, like, if you look on IMDb, he's all the way at the bottom, but I'm pretty sure he had more scenes than Nick Cage.
He certainly had more screen time than Nick Cage.
Yeah.
I think he may have been like in the exact same number of scenes. They were just larger, kind of more impactful
right
scenes.
So he's supervising basically after the training. Snowden gets sent to Switzerland to do some CIA business there, and Mr. Timothy's character is a CIA agent that's kind of in charge of whatever this op is that he's on, and he knows that Snowden wants to like do field work. And so he's trying to get Snowden into field work, but before that has Snowden do some stuff that involve has him try and get some information on some people, and to do so there's another contractor from the NSA that comes in, who's your very typical like hacker guy, like, kind of he does everything but like smoke weed right there. But just like he calls him Snow White, and he calls Snowden Snow White, and
I felt like his character in Sweden is completely different than his character that we see later in Hawaii.
I agree, yeah. But it's been years, so at that point,
I mean, maybe a year. Like, it's not. Is it that big of a jump?
Yeah, it is.
Maybe it is.
Because 2013 is when he releases everything, and he's working at that place when that happens. So we haven't gotten that far in the notes yet, but yeah, I think it's a bigger jump than that. But yeah, this guy shows up, and he's like, Snowden's like, I don't have clearance to watch you do this, and he's like, well, you got this clearance, don't you? Just watch me do it. And so he, at this point, finds out that the government has access to anybody's webcam, anybody's personal SMS text messages, emails, all these different things. And so he's trying to find information on this person, and all this hacker guy, all this hacker guy, legal hacker, I guess, I don't know, the NSA person, all he has to do is like type in some keywords, like a Google search. He even says that, I think he says, like, think of a Google search but with
Mhm.
people's personal information, and he
It's federated searching is
right.
like, this is early federated searching. That's like a more normal thing now, but yeah, that's what this is.
Right. And at one point, he finds some woman and he opens her webcam on her laptop and he's like watching her get undressed. And, so at this point, we learn that the government has access to all these different cameras. At
And
that point, maybe.
Snowden's getting more and more uncomfortable as the guy goes on looking for stuff.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not a good situation. It's a very tense, awkward scene. That depending on your feelings on the situation, you might have certain emotions
right.
about learning or seeing those things in action.
Right. And so I guess I should mention before this that Timothy Olyphant's character has him do, like, at his first field work test or whatever, where he has him go try and schmooze like some bankers that are like Middle Eastern bankers to try
Mm-hmm.
and like because they're all connected to Al Qaeda or something like that. Because a lot of this is based around, like, there's a lot of mentions of 9/11
Right.
and taking out bin Laden and things like that, and so they're trying to find information on somebody that they can link to terrorist organizations. And so he has no luck, but his girlfriend, who he's still dating, has is much better at dealing with people. So she says, I'll help you. And so she finds this banker and introduces him. And so that's who they're looking up information on. They're like looking at his sister-in-law or something undressing is the one they're looking at. And he finds like some connection to his daughter's seeing a boy that is an illegal in the country. And so Snowden gives that information to Timothy Olyphant's character. And the next scene after all this, we see them all in a strip club. The banker guy, Snowden, and Timothy Olyphant's character. And we find out that since Snowden gave that information, that the young man has now been deported, and the daughter is super depressed.
She
Um,
tried to commit suicide.
yeah, tried to kill herself. Um, and so they're trying. Snowden doesn't know what's going on at this point, really. Like, he's just finding this all out, but it's clear that the CIA agent that Timothy Olyphant plays is trying to get him drunk. He just keeps feeding him drinks and just keeping him talking, and at the end of the night he tries to get him to drive drunk so that they can call the police and then get the guy locked up, or and use that as pressure
Mm-hmm.
to get him to give up some like contacts. Um,
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad stuff. It's all very unethical. It's coercion and extortion and entrapment and some other things.
but all within the legal confines of the United States,
Yes,
government.
well, legal and ethical are not always the same thing.
It's true. And
Um,
at one point, Snowden says, "Well, I'll tell the banker what you're doing," and he says, "Well, if you do that, then you'll go to jail for longer than the banker would."
Yeah, because basically Snowden threatens to blow Oliphant's character's cover. His he's undercover, and obviously, like, that would come with very serious charges if an agent were to do that. Even if they were to do it accidentally, I'm sure there would be
Right.
significant consequences. So doing it on purpose would be a big deal. But we can start to see that Snowden has certain lines, right? When we first see him at the beginning of the movie, it's like, I'll do anything for my country. I'm here to serve my country. And now we're seeing that, well, he does have certain lines that maybe he didn't know he had that he's discovering at this
Right.
point.
Yeah. So throughout this movie, with his girlfriend, he's not telling her anything ever.
Right.
She, on that first date, kind of figures out that he's CIA or some sort of thing, because she says she has had friends that said they were government contractors or something like that.
Well,
And
he says that he works at the State Department, and she goes,
State
"Oh, okay.
Department.
Point to the State Department." And of course, he has no idea where the State Department is. And I mean, this is just a tip for all of the three named organization agents who are listening to our show. If you're going to give your people like a cover story, maybe make them learn the locations of the
Right.
things.
Yeah, she even if he had been able to point to it, it seems like she would have known because she has said she's known people that have said the same thing, and
Yeah,
and because he lives in a specific state that's notoriously, full of government workers like that.
sure.
That's where their headquarters is at. But yeah, so then we get a really awkward scene where he's trying to have sex with his girlfriend, and he realizes that there's a webcam up, like a laptop is up,
Mm-hmm.
with the webcam pointed towards the bed. And now, I mean, there's nothing saying that they're recording at that point, but in his mind, he just watched this woman like getting undressed in front of her camera without her knowledge. He's starting to go, think about that.
Right.
And so then
Well, because like it's also important context. Like that there weren't any warrants that needed to be, signed by judges. They didn't have to get approval from anybody to do this. They just had to like access this webcam. And the
right.
guy that we saw do it, he's acting kind of sleazy, right? Like if Snowden doesn't say anything, he's going to keep watching that webcam video.
Right.
So it is plausible that people just are doing that.
It's also plausible that because he's a government agent, that there's somebody checking in on him from time to time,
True.
Especially after what just happened with him threatening to like break the undercover mission and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of an awkward sex scene. I almost put up because we have on our bingo card nudity, but it wasn't really nudity. Really, you just see kind of her back for most of it. But there is nudity later.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, at this point we didn't cross off the nudity part of the card. So then after that I don't even know how long after, but he goes to Japan basically. Like is this when he's an NSA?
Well, so he resigns at this point.
Right.
Like that night he resigned. And so that's part of his mental state. But yeah, so then he starts doing contract work, and he does contract work for the NSA. He does it for the CIA. He does it for different government organizations for several years.
Right. And yeah, he says that he's basically just like a hawking, software. He's just
Right.
a fancy software salesman. But my next note is sleeper programs in all countries, because I guess there's something as an NSA contractor, he's been able to find out that they have, they have been injecting programs into all the different major utility companies for all these different countries, so that if the government was to have an issue with these countries, or there is something going on, then they could literally shut down their entire infrastructure through these virus, essentially a virus, government mandated virus. Or
it's even worse than utilities. Like they mentioned hospitals. Like they put these programs into hospital systems.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, like, in this case, Japan. They mentioned Austria. They mentioned allies, countries that are allies to the United States. And the thought process that we're told is that, well, if that ever changes and they decide not to be allies anymore, then we'll make them sorry really fast, is essentially the line.
Right.
And what Snowden's, this really kind of shocked Snowden, because I think, like many people, it's probably assumed that we do this to countries that we see as a legitimate threat or as an enemy. And that in itself may have some ethical issues, but once you start seeing it in countries who are our allies, and some of them are our closest allies, you start to kind of raise other questions.
Right. So then we get our nudity scene. Apparently in
I love Japan, the way you said that.
In Japan, his girlfriend is struggling. She's not enjoying Japan. It seems like she didn't really come because she wanted to. And so she is taking like nude portraits of herself. I think it's of herself.
So she is. I think she was doing this before, though, because when the night he resigns and he comes into the room, there are photos on the floor of her. And it's kind of quick, so you don't get a great look at it. So I think she's been doing this for a while, though.
Yeah, at this point you see her like on the computer editing him, and they
Yeah.
talk editing them, and they talk about what they are. So it's more
Hmm.
obvious what they are. And then they have a fight, a pretty big fight. You know, I can't remember if this is right at this moment, but she notices that he put band-aids over the cameras on the laptops and stuff. And so she asks why he's doing this, and he like doesn't come out and say it, but she can kind of figure out what's going on. And she says, well, that's fine because I don't have anything to hide.
Hmm.
And he comes out and says, like, well, what about you talking to guys on this dating website in Japan? And she's like, well, I'm just talking to him. You're gone for all the time. I'm just making conversation. And he said she left her laptop open and he saw this. And she's like, oh, now you're spying on me. And,
Well,
yeah.
so and it's the original, it's the same site that the two of them met on. I think
Yeah.
that's what really got his attention, right? And she's claiming that it's more of like, oh, well, I'm drawing a blank on the term for it though, where she's vicariously kind of living through these other people because she feels so isolated and alone. She points out that like she doesn't have a work visa. She even told him that she wouldn't be able to get one if they were to come here. So she can't really have a job. She doesn't know anybody. Um, so she's, like you said earlier, she's struggling.
Yeah. And so she ends up moving back to Maryland.
They
I
break
think that's
up.
where it was. Yeah, they break
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Her parents' house.
Yeah. And he finishes out his tour in Japan or whatever, I guess, and decides to move back to Maryland. Am I getting that right?
More or less. Yeah. I don't know
Yeah.
that he necessarily moved to Maryland specifically. It's a little, that's not,
He moved back
but
to that area.
he went back to the States.
Yeah. And so he goes on a hunting trip with his former professor,
Corbin. Yeah.
Corbin. And because they've had kind of a relationship through this whole thing. He's kept looking out for him and following his progress and stuff like that. And so they go hunting, and Snowden kind of reveals that he knows that they're monitoring, like normal people's cell phones and stuff like that. Um, and this whole hunting trip was basically to introduce him to the deputy director of the NSA, wasn't it?
Yes. Yes, it was. But I guess we did skip over one piece that is important. When he was doing his contract work in Japan, he built a program system that was designed to be like a fail-safe backup. If a city or a location, a fort, whatever was completely obliterated, you would have saved all of the data and could restore it extremely quickly somewhere else. Um, I'm drawing a blank on what it was called. It was like black
Yeah, I don't
something.
remember.
But yeah, so that's an important thing to keep in mind, that he built this himself from scratch, and it was a very big deal and worked extremely well.
Yeah, and now they're using it as like a primary program to do things that it wasn't necessarily meant to be doing. Um, and that program basically got him in the door with the deputy director of the NSA, who wants him to go work for them. And around this time, him and the girlfriend get together again.
Uh-huh.
They start dating again, and I had in my notes irony of dating a photographer as a cameraphobe, because at this point he like doesn't want to be photographed at all, and
Yeah.
she's like begging to take pictures of him. But it seems like they're doing better. They have a house together.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, he's cooking for her and has a seizure,
Yes.
and that is like a big thing. And he goes to the doctor or the hospital or whatever, and they tell him you need to be on these meds, or else you could, have a seizure while driving or something like that and put other people's lives in danger. And so he says, sure, fine, whatever. And then they go to Hawaii. That's where his.
Well, so there's a little bit of a jump there. So what's important to point out is that he gets the job offer in Hawaii, but she doesn't.
Say, yeah.
Yeah, but she doesn't want to go. Right? They just got back together. They just rebuilt their life. She's happy, right? Like she's not ready to like uproot all of that. But these seizures are kind of a big deal, right? And they appear to be genetic. He makes some comment about, I believe it was his mother took the same medication. That's why he was hesitant. And so she suggests that maybe Hawaii would be a less stressful environment and help with the seizures. Now, look, yes, I believe that Hawaii as a geographic spot is less stressful than Washington, D.C. However, he's still doing the same kind of work. It's never at any point implied that he would be doing a different, completely kind of work. So I don't
Right.
know what made her think that that would be different.
Right. But because of that, they decided to go to Hawaii because they think that it'll be less stressful and good for his health.
Yeah.
Or at least that's how maybe he gaslights her into thinking that. I don't know. But it's somehow she comes to that conclusion and says, I'll go with you if that's going to help. And so he gets to Hawaii, and like his introduction to his new job is watching a bunch of people get murdered via drone bombings of some kind. I think they're drone bombings. I don't know. There's some kind of bombings. They were
They
literally
are.
watching a live cam of people getting blown up.
Yeah, literally like so these are the data guys, right? And they feed this data to like the people piloting the drones and then they, you know, bomb the places. And what they're doing is they're specifically tracking SIM cards and phones. And it's brought up. It's like, well, how do you know the target is in possession of the phone at the time? You know, like,
Yeah.
well, we've got people on the ground feeding intelligence or whatever. Like, you're like,
But there's
okay,
another guy in the room, another employee that when he says that, he looks at Snowden and he's like shaking his head, no, this is not how we don't have that. We're just murdering people.
yeah. And even then, like, even if that was true, once you see the attacks take place, like more than one person is getting hit.
Yeah, they're big,
These are like little
explosions.
missiles, you know. So
Yeah,
like they're blowing up entire vehicles. There's dust clouds. Like you're getting a handful of people every single time you do this.
right.
Yeah.
And so he's working there for a while. I don't really remember. Oh, he runs into the hacker guy again because he works here also. But yes, he does seem like a much different character at this point. So clearly something has happened. Uh,
Maybe he grew up. I don't know. It's been
he
a
just
few years.
matured.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think. I mean, you correct me if something is as important has happened, but I feel like I just skipped huge portions of this movie because, like in my notes, because nothing really important happened. A lot of stuff just was happening in the movie, and it didn't really end up being important. But he goes to a party, like an after hours party, with a bunch of people from his like work unit, and he has a seizure there after an argument with about like government regulations on the way that things are handled in there with his supervisor.
Well, so this is directly after. There's one scene before this that's a kind of a big deal. So he's come up with an idea for a new program that is basically a new version of federated searching. Um,
Called
and
Heartbeat.
yeah, heartbeat. And he's, playing off some things because they don't know he knows about this other one and other stuff. But he really has a secondary motive of wanting the data kind of coordinated and consolidated so he can make some educated decisions. And this pulls together this heat map that he shows three of the other guys, right? So there's different areas, and two guys are working in one area which is like offensive, and he's working with this one other guy in like a defensive, and they're not supposed to cross the streams, right? But in this case, he's got these three guys and he's showing them, and basically what this heat map is showing is emails that have been analyzed by, in this case, the NSA. And you're seeing that, it's millions upon millions, hundreds of millions. And it shows that the US has had basically twice as many. It was like over 3 billion emails processed through this program, more than double any other country on the planet,
Including Russia.
including Russia.
Yeah.
Russia was like the next biggest at like 1.2 billion or something. And so it's kind of like, that's like this big moment, right? Where they're showing that like, this is not just being used against foreign interests or external threats. This is being used, for just everyday Americans basically combing every email, right? And those who remember the actual events, right? This came out about, they're coming through Verizon and Google and Apple and Microsoft, like all the heavy hitters.
Yeah, Facebook, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so, then they have this party.
Yeah, they have this party, and he gets into a little bit, not really an argument, more like his boss says something, and then Snowden corrects him because he's the smartest person in the world.
Well, he makes it's a very so this isn't a complicated argument because I don't disagree with the general logic and the premise, right? But anytime you need to use World War II, Nazis, and or Hitler as your analog, as your analogy, um, it just doesn't always come off particularly well because it's kind of like a slam dunk example that to shut people up in a lot of cases. And so what happens here is his boss um, basically says that, well, we're just working for the government,
Yeah.
right? So, we're not doing anything criminal. We're doing what the government's telling us to do. And Edward makes the comment about how well they started prosecuting Nazis who were just the regular workers following orders. He uses the phrase, just following orders and things like that. It's a good, heavy argument, but it always feels a little weird to me when those parallels are drawn. But yeah, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah. And immediately after this, he has a seizure again. And you find out that he's off his meds because he tells his girlfriend that he needs to be sharp because people's lives are at stake. And she is like, more so than other people. And he's like, yes, I'm more responsible for people's lives than other people. And this is kind of the wind down of the movie, where all the reveals are happening, and you find out that at some point he has a meeting with his old instructor again,
Corbin,
and we find out that he looked up his girlfriend on that site, on that thing.
Well, she's been bugged essentially.
No, he looked her up. He admits that.
Yeah,
he does find out that she's been bugged, but he asked the instructor guy asked, have you accessed any other programs? And he says that he did, and it's implied that he looked up his girlfriend.
He even says that he was jealous because during the party before he has the seizure, he sees her possibly flirting with this other guy. We can't hear anything that's being said. They're just having a good time, but we're supposed to interpret it as she's interested in this guy.
Right. And he's jealous.
That's his lens.
Yeah. And so after that meeting, he's basically deciding that he's going to do this. He's going to, leak all this stuff as much as he can. And so he goes and talks to his girlfriend and says, the house is probably bugged. This is what we need to do. She tries to set it up so that they'll both leave at the same time. And she's like, no, that'll be more suspicious. And so they work it out. And he ends up doing his mission to get all this data. And so it's shown before that like he gets a pretty big search when he goes in, right? They are looking for SD cards and things like that. And in this day when he gets this leaked or this information to leak, he has the SD card hidden in a Rubik's Cube. However, it doesn't show how he gets the Rubik's Cube in. And when it's on the way out, he tosses it to one of the guards, so it never actually goes through the scanner. But I'm pretty sure he didn't do that same move going in, because then that would have been super obvious.
So there's a couple of things here. First, it's important to preface with this part is not what actually happens in the real world. Snowden never told anyone how he got the data out, number one. Number two, he did not do it in one large dump at one time. He did it over multiple occasions.
Yeah.
So this is where the movie specifically took some liberties to make it a tighter story and, things like that. Now, I have two other things. I have two problems with this. One, how did he get it through security the first time? You're right. It's completely glossed over. It is not shown in any way at all. That is problem number one. Problem number two, that SD card should not function in that laptop. And what I mean by that is in today's world, regular IT departments can shut down that type of functionality from even
Right.
just flash USB flash drives, SD cards. All of that can just on a normal Dell laptop. A regular IT team using consumer grade software can shut that stuff down. You're telling me that the NSA just allowed that functionality to work?
Not only that, but they probably could flag it anytime any kind of external storage is plugged into, any USB or any kind of port.
Also, that just the idea of copying large
Right.
sums
He's
of
literally
files
just
and
copying
data.
and pasting like it's File Explorer on
Yeah.
the,
And like
you know,
there's no security around this at all.
yeah,
I just find that I find that deeply unlikely, number one. Number
agreed.
two, like none of these screens are being recorded anywhere and stored anywhere for what these actions are for auditing purposes. Like there's so many holes in that. Like I get that that's not what really happened in the real world. So it definitely comes off like a very Hollywood plot.
Yeah, so basically he gets the SD card and he sticks it into like the keyboard or some port, and that's connected to the computer, and he downloads the copies the files, and of course it has the dramatic like it's going up in percent while people are around, and like right when it's at 100% he hits the thing and it pops out, shoots out on the carpet right as people are walking in, and his friend that he works with covered it with his foot so that he wouldn't get caught. And yeah, so then he decides to leave because he's not feeling well. He now has this excuse for the seizures that he can step away for a few days if he needs to. So he slips the SD card into the Rubik's cube, uh, slides the red cover over it, and goes to walk out. And as he's getting ready to go through the scanner, he throws the cube to the security guard. He's like, "You ever played with one of these?" And then he goes through the scanner, and then the security guard just hands it to him around the other side. Yeah.
And the whole time you're like, is he going to get caught? Is it going to open up? One guy tries to kind of like take the Rubik's Cube apart because there's always like that one person who doesn't understand even like how a Rubik's Cube moves. Like, right. I get it if you can't solve it, right? But it's another thing to think, well, I could just tear it apart into pieces. There's always that person. Oh, God.
So yeah, that's basically the cut to the modern times again, or present
We're caught
day
up
or whatever.
To present day.
Yeah. And so yeah, we are in the hotel room, and the rest of the movie is basically just like, I don't know, this is where it kind of gets weird. It's just like a bunch of journalists discussing the best way to release this. It's not the most exciting thing to watch.
No. But again, like they're dealing with the dilemma of ethical or legal, and is this legit, and all these other things, and it's not the most exciting thing. But you do have some good actors in here that are doing, I think, the best they can with the situation.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the rest of the movie is basically like him outrunning the government, going to like different safe house areas or something like that, and and then there's some interviews that he does, and in one of them it's like a panning shot with like him going to Joseph Gordon-Levitt's face, and then there's like a beam, and on the other side of the beam it's the actual Snowden character. And this is where I started to really get like the masturbatory kind of feeling about the movie, where it's just like him stroking his ego.
Right.
If this had been made without any of Snowden's input, I might feel a little different but at this point it's confirmed that Snowden definitely was a part of the production at some point. And that's when it was like, okay, this guy's just like, trying to make himself out to be this hero. We don't know. We're getting one side of the story that's made to look super heroic, and the other side is left out of the movie, if there is one. I'm not familiar enough with it to know, but I'm sure there's things that were left out that would make him look like maybe not as much of a hero. But yeah, that's basically how it ends. He's giving a speech.
We do get this one scene though. What Nicolas Cage's final scene.
Oh yeah, that's true.
He's sitting in, I guess, his living room. You can kind of see his supposed wife off to the side, and he's watching the news after this all breaks, right? Because they do decide to release all of this, and it all breaks. Yeah. He's like, he's sitting there. He's like, he did it. I can't believe it. He did it.
The kid did it, or something.
The kid, right? Yeah. And I'm like, did you guys have conversations about this? Like, I felt like there was a chunk missing.
You're probably right.
Where he like helped lead this kid to this.
He probably had a contract with how many scenes they have to show him in, and so that's why they just kind of threw this one in there.
Maybe.
But yeah, that's pretty much how the movie ends.
He did this movie as a favor to Oliver Stone after he did the Twin Towers movie, which was another Oliver Stone flick about that one specifically about 9/11. So he did this as a favor, but it just felt this is just kind of like where it ends, right? You get some documentary style footage of Snowden himself. You get some archival footage of different political leaders and their takes on it. And
yeah, throughout the credits, it's kind of just like filtered in with the real life things that happened afterwards.
You've got, well, things start to get a little bit better, right? Obama cancels this, he puts this into law, right? Maybe some things get worse again. Like, is anything really changing? And so the movie kind of leaves you with this concept of like, well, did this really change anything? Is the world a better place? Is the country a better place? Is it a worse place? And then meanwhile, Snowden, he's basically stuck in Moscow in Russia. When he tries to leave Japan to get to, I believe it was Ecuador, he has a layover in Moscow. And during that time, the US, revokes his passport, like you do. I don't know why they didn't do that before he left Japan. But they did, and he gets stuck in Moscow. Moscow, of course, not necessarily Russia being our best friends in the world, decided to grant him asylum. And so he stays there. The movie doesn't cover this, but in real life, his girlfriend does move to Russia to be with him.
Well, they do bring that up in the movie.
Was that brought up in the movie?
Yeah, they bring it up in like the credits, I think.
Okay, gotcha. But yes, I mean, as of the movie's release, that's where he still was. I don't really keep tabs on him, but yeah, that's it. He was stuck in Russia after releasing all of this data, and it became very public. And you can obviously do a lot of reading on the topics from across the world because this impacted other countries as well. A lot of people had opinions about it.
But yeah, we're just here to talk about the movie itself. So
that's it.
We're not going to get into that. But yeah. So now what? We got to rate this movie?
Yeah, so we rate all these movies on two scales: overall quality and overall caginess, from 1 to 20. 1 low, 20 is high. Ryan, overall quality. Where would you rate the Snowden film?
It's kind of a tough one because it's not a poorly made film and it's got good actors. It just wasn't really good, So I feel like it's got to be like a 11 or a 12.
11 or a 12. So that puts it for you, that puts it on par with City of Angels and 8mm.
I mean, I probably enjoyed City of Angels more, but in terms of quality, they're probably pretty similar.
Okay. So an 11 for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's fair. I'm actually going to give it the exact same. I'm going to give it an 11 as well, because I gave National Treasure and you gave National Treasure. We each gave it a 12. And I think National Treasure was better. So I'm gonna put this right below National Treasure. So we have an 11 on quality. Now, overall caginess, I mean, he's got 3 scenes, and there might have been 4. They're very straight scenes. He's super mellow. There's really not a whole lot for him to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the caginess is pretty low here. Like, I think it has to be like a 1.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There's literally no caginess in this. So
okay. So yeah, I mean that's it. So there you go. It's 11 on quality, a 1 on caginess. It's a mediocre, a slightly above mediocre film. It's got a good cast.
Yeah.
If
the subject matter isn't really that interesting, in my opinion. It's way too long. There's a lot of things that they cover in the movie that don't really need to be a part of the movie. Yeah, but if you're really into the Snowden stuff or really into political movies, then I guess this might be a good one for you.
And, if you don't want the dramatization about it, there were documentaries made that, of course, are not unbiased, but they're at least not Hollywoodified. They
also don't have Nick Cage in them. So
that's true. They don't have Nick Cage, or probably Timothy Oliphant or Joseph Gordon-Levitt, or Zachary Quinto. So, so take that with what you will. But now we got to figure out what movie is going to join our Wheel O' Cage and replace this. And that new movie is Christmas Carol, the movie, which it says voice. So I guess that's an animated version of Christmas Carol. So that's going to join our Wheel O' Cage. To find out what movie we're going to talk about next time on the show, go to comingofcage.com and watch our latest Wheel O' Cage spin to find out which movie comes up on the wheel. But that's going to be it for me. Ryan, anything else for Snowden?
No, I'm good. We covered all of it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. We are the Coming of Cage podcast. You can watch us on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe on your podcast app of choice. And please leave us a review. Let us know. We'll read your review on the show. It helps people find the show, helps people find us. You can follow us at Coming of Cage or just go to comingofcage.com for all the links. That's it. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.